Hello and welcome to an all-new episode of the Bitcoin News Show right here on the CryptoCast Network. We have an amazing show for you guys, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we're going to be talking about Bitcoin as a privacy coin, Shapeshift adopting KYC, and is crypto awareness up or not? But before we do that, let's go ahead and share out the links. You guys can check out our website at CryptoCast.network, where you'll be able to find our YouTube link, Twitter link, Instagram, iTunes, and RSS. We also have our shirts up there for merchandise for you guys to check out to support the show. And we are displaying our QR code because this is a community supported YouTube channel and we hope you guys are liking the content. So check that out. And of course, we are still having our programmingwithbitcoin.com workshop, which is an interactive 2-day course where we teach C# application developers how to work with Bitcoin, specifically the NBitcoin library. And that is taught by both myself and Nicolas Doyer, the creator of the NBitcoin library. And we'll be coming to you guys. We're trying to take this all over the country, but we'll be coming to you guys right now in San Francisco on October 13th and Seattle November 3rd. So with that aside, guys, let's stop the screen share and get right into the episode. Really proud to have my guest on here today, guys. Let's go ahead and introduce them. Actually, you know what? Before we do that, let's go with the quick bit section. I want to talk about the quick bit. So let's go ahead and go to the quick bit section, guys. So this is your weekly news where we're going to talk about what's going on with crypto and Bitcoin, specifically Bitcoin. So here we go. Pierre Rochard put out a tweet earlier today, guys, actually earlier this week, about the social cost is real when comparing two specific different developer ads for both a regular developer and a blockchain developer. You guys can see that if you guys check out the links in the show notes below, you will see that the blockchain developer is actually trying to charge specifically more than the regular healthcare developer. So you guys can see that, look, when these ICOs get out of control, they really start outbidding regular developers. And that's where I think Pierre really means that the social cost is real. So check out that link below. And then next we have the first Lightning powered atomic swap on the Grin network. So for those of you who don't know, Grin is a fork of Bitcoin. It is a super ultra privacy coin that it's not getting too much traction yet, but it's still very, very early in development. And they actually did an atomic swap for 500 Grin for 2 ETH. So that was pretty interesting. Check out that link below. And then a little bit of a shout out here to Mr. Alex Bosworth himself. He started his new position this week as the Lightning infrastructure lead at Lightning Labs. Alex Bosworth is probably most notably known for pioneering submarine swaps on the Lightning network, where you can actually swap between a Lightning channel and an off-chain and off-chain funds without actually closing or opening the Lightning channel. So that's really, really cool. Check that out. Then Coinbase there's a lot of talk about ETF still, guys. I mean, Coinbase is now eyeing an ETF with help from BlackRock. There's a link below. And now you can play with the Lightning via CoinGate, which is a merchant processor, a pretty big crypto merchant processor out there. They just began accepting Lightning Network. So now over 4,000 merchants can start accepting Lightning. So that's really, really cool. And then we have Casa, who is joining the Lightning hardware node brigade. There's a lot of people out there now trying to get Lightning nodes out to developers, and Casa is the latest one. So they have developed a Lightning node that you guys can check out and purchase. And the little bit more, there's a lot of Lightning news today, guys. The third edition of the Lightning Hackaday kicked off this week in Berlin. Had some amazing demos in there. I highly recommend everybody check that out. Some really great demos, including some Coinjoin demos. Really, really good stuff, guys. Some privacy tech in there, really good stuff. And they were also talking about Lightning and split payments, which is basically like AMP 2.0, atomic multipath payments, being able to send funds through multiple channels simultaneously. Very powerful stuff, guys. It kind of turns Lightning into, one-to-many instead of just this one-to-one peer-to-peer. So very, very powerful stuff. And then also we did, guys, want to let you know that we did launch two new shows this week. One is called Bitcoin Matters with Beauty On, and then the other is called Crypto Q&A with Heidi as the host. So very, very proud to bring you guys those shows. Hope you guys like them. We got a lot more of those coming. So without further ado, let's introduce our guest today. First, we have joining us Mr. Ragnar. Ragnar, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Glad to be here.
Yeah, man. This is Ragnar, which is the founder of the International Blockchain Real Estate Association, guys. So a lot of real estate and blockchain. If you guys want to follow real estate, anything to do with blockchain and real estate, please make sure you follow Ragnar. He's got a lot of good stuff on there. It's actually been a while, Ragnar, since we've had you on. So glad to have you on. I think the last time was like in January. So really glad to have you on again. Awesome. And then for the first time, ladies and gentlemen, we have Mr. Stefan Lira. Stefan, how you doing today?
Hey guys, thanks very much. Thanks for having me on Vortex. It's a pleasure to be on the Bitcoin News Show for the first time.
Absolutely, man. We've been loving your podcast. You just keep pumping out more content than I think anybody I know right now. We just, me and you actually just had a interview. So you just interviewed me recently for your podcast, and I had a great time. And I hope the viewers get a chance to check that out. But yeah, definitely, guys, if you are looking for podcasts with interviewing people who are prominent in the space, important in the space, make sure to check out Stefan's podcast. Lots of great interviews there. And finally, the oldie but goodie, I guess, Mr. Francis Puglia joining us once again, our resident genius on the show. Francis, how you doing today?
Come on, Vortex. I'm not a genius. I'm just some guy who's ranting off on Twitter, and people keep listening. I'm doing great. I'm doing great. It's a great day. Happy to be back. I'm super excited about Bitcoin. I'm super bullish these days. So I think it's going to be a great episode. Thanks for having me again.
Awesome, Francis. You bet, man. Come on. We're all pretty smart, but Francis probably is one of the smartest on the show, guys. So he's very, very humble, but we're not going to let him get away with too much of that humbleness. So thanks again, guys, so much for joining. We have a lot to talk about today, so I think we can get right into the first topic here, which is Bitcoin as a privacy coin. This tech, Aaron did another great, amazing article on BitcoinMagazine.com about Bitcoin, and this is really cool because it's talking about all the latest privacy technologies that are being worked on in the Bitcoin space specifically, and there's a lot of it, and it's actually due out pretty soon. So I want to start talking about this, start getting this conversation around with people who are prominent in the community. So let me ask you first, Ragnar, what are your thoughts on this particular article on privacy and Bitcoin? Can we start to think of now Bitcoin as a privacy coin with all of this tech, all this privacy tech on the horizon?
Yes, I think we can. And what impressed me the most about Aaron's article, besides its technical accuracy, was how many of these are available now. As you go through the article, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 says availability now. And a year or two ago, that wasn't the case. There was all these hypothetical ones, but now they're available. There's different tools based on your preference and which wallet you have. So we're just in the beginning stages of all these great privacy enhancements. And, I think an interesting discussion is, I think the strongest argument against Bitcoin is its privacy and fungibility. It's nice to see these people create these, brilliant solutions. But an interesting conversation is, what if Bitcoin was absolutely anonymous from day one? Would Bitcoin still be around if that was the case? So I think, whether intended or not, I think it's better that Bitcoin has this, track record where governments feel comfortable with it because they can do this chain analysis. And by the time we have mass adoption, it might be too late. So very impressive.
Yeah. I think, I agree with you that, we want to get this stuff working in now before we get to mass adoption, right? Like that's what's going to be really, really important, is to make sure that we start focusing on this now, because, changes do take a long time to get put into place into the Bitcoin network by design. Of course, this is part of what makes it decentralized and hard to change. So let's go with Stefan next. Stefan, what are your comments on this article? What do you think? Do you think that Bitcoin is a privacy coin now? And do you think that maybe we should have had privacy, like by default from the start?
Well, so that's the interesting thing. So obviously agreed with the comments by Ragnar. I think it's a fantastic article as well by Aaron. I think he's one of the top journalists in this space, and he's known for his accuracy and his technical proficiency as well. Now, in terms of, I think it's one of those things where we live in a world with trade-offs, right? So the same way with confidential transactions, there are trade-offs associated with that as well, such as the larger amount of space required. Although, if you've been following the news on this, there is the bulletproofs that came out that brings it down a little bit and makes it a little bit more feasible to implement. However, there are still trade-offs always and forever. So that's just the nature of the beast. And ultimately, like some of the developers have been mentioning, ideally, it's important to ensure that many of these things, there's either an incentive to do it or it's on by default. Because if it costs you additional time and effort to go and actually make your coins private, then many people won't do that. And as we saw with Zcash, an alleged privacy coin. However, there was some research that came out by, I think it was the UCL team, and they did some work, and they basically found that there was not a large enough anonymity set, as in not enough people were using it by default. So that's kind of the aim, is that hopefully once we get enough wallets, first of all, using Lightning as well, then there'll be an additional amount of privacy added through that. However, yeah, like it is important to eventually get to a stage where it's just kind of a bit of a default. Otherwise, it's going to be a bit difficult.
Yep, great point, Stefan. Let's go with Francis next. Francis, what are your thoughts on the discussion so far? I mean, it sounds like that so far the panelists are really liking the privacy on Bitcoin. It sounds like that we're really liking the technology that's coming out, and we're pretty hopeful so far with some of the stuff. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, there's many aspects to like making Bitcoin more private. There's obviously the base layer where you have transaction formats, for example. That's one part. That's confidential transactions, for example. That's something that's not yet into Bitcoin, but that's something that I think we can expect to happen one day. And then there's the layer 2 aspect, the trustless layer 2 aspect, and by that I mean, for example, the liquid sidechain, where you can have confidential transactions right now on the liquid chain. And that's really important because a lot of like financial institutions, this may be counterintuitive, but a lot of financial institutions consider Bitcoin to be not private enough for inter-financial settlement. For example, if you're JP Morgan Chase and you want to transact with UBS and you want to send billions of dollars, you don't necessarily want people to observe the blockchain and see those like billion-dollar payments, billion-dollar transactions, because these are transactions that stand out, and then people will obviously focus on these ones to observe, and so people can use these institutions can now utilize sidechains to make very large settlements. And the Lightning Network, it's funny because when we were at the Building on Bitcoin conference, I think someone said, I think it was Nopara from Hidden Wallet, he said, Lightning Network could have been just as easily called the Bitcoin Darknet. Lightning Network was a really good brand because we focused on the speed aspect of Lightning, but Lightning Network is extremely private. So now that the network is being bootstrapped, you're going to see a lot of people that are going to be not advertising, not flagging their public Lightning nodes, and taking those nodes, not offline, but off the registries, right? So Lightning Network is definitely a huge improvement. I'm not sure it's mentioned in the article. And still at the BIP kind of and then you have the application layer on top. So these are other services that are done that are not protocol upgrades, that are just kind of apps. For example, you have Paynims, which is not mentioned here in Samurai. So Paynim is obviously a BIP, but it's something that's done at the application layer. So some of the really neat ones that have come out. One of my favorite ones is Dandelion, because a lot of people focus on tracking payments on the blockchain, but they also forget that transactions are broadcasted on the network, and you can kind of track the origin of those transactions. So Dandelion is really cool. Basically, in Bitcoin right now, when you broadcast a transaction, you're just going to basically relay it to the peers to which you're connected, and you're going to be broadcasting that. So it's not super difficult to try and track where that transaction was initially broadcast from. But what Dandelion does, imagine it's like those. It's kind of like those little eggs that you use for cooking. There's like a timer on it, and then it just kind of pops. So you're going to be sending like private transactions to other nodes, and at some point, randomly, it's just going to be broadcast in a network later on. So it's really difficult to kind of retroactively trace where this one was broadcast from. So you got all these improvements that are coming into Bitcoin, which are really, really good, really great. I think there's a few that are not yet in. BIP 151 is a really important one. Just have some encryption layer between nodes. And Dandelion, I expect, might be in Bitcoin Core, maybe 0.17.1 or 0.17.2. And I like the idea. I definitely like the idea of adding privacy at the second layer and also at the application layer, because there are some benefits to having some traceability and auditability on the blockchain itself. This is something that may be counterintuitive, but if you look at coins like Grin, in Grin, you really don't have any idea of what's happening on the blockchain. Everything's kind of super hidden by default. And this removes the ability for some users to audit some state of the blockchain. And this is important. For example, when Zcash did its privacy thing, of course, assuming it's private by design, there's one problem with Zcash, is that because of the privacy by design at the blockchain layer, it is functionally impossible to know if someone created money out of thin air. It's impossible to audit the origin of all those coins. So, I mean, privacy is hugely important. I mean, I hope we didn't miss the boat yet. I hope all those BIPs get passed, because when we were doing the scaling debate in 2015, I remember one of the things that we used to say was there is a window of political acceptability where we can make those BIPs pass in the network. And the kind of slogan that a lot of us were trying to pass was, privacy now and scalability later. So it's going to be very interesting to see those privacy BIPs, how they get merged in the future. And hopefully, with our experience with user-activated soft fork, we won't get this opposition from centralized third parties like huge mining pools that are opposing those changes. So yeah, I'm definitely super excited. Privacy. The privacy coins, I don't see them as competing with Bitcoin that much, because I think the number one function, the number one desired feature is censorship resistance rather than privacy. But still, it's definitely good that Bitcoins, even though I don't think they can compete at all, it's definitely good just for the narrative, so that people stop trying to invest in those coins, thinking that they'll have value in the future because Bitcoin's not private. Hopefully this will get some investors to not lose their money investing in those coins, thinking that they're going to be more in demand later on.
Yep. I mean, this is what's coming. Like, we've seen the chain analysis companies. We've seen them coming. We've seen what they've told us what they want to do. We've seen some of the work that they've done, and it's scary. And it's not, it's not what we want. I think that overwhelming majority wants Bitcoin to be as private as possible. And so I really am glad that, like you say, Francis, we can get this window. We can get this stuff in now in this window of time that we have before Bitcoin gets too big, gets too mainstream, gets too political, and people are like, no, we can't do any privacy. We can't get any privacy merged. But I think we are in the next couple of years. I think that window is here. I think we still have that within the next couple of years specifically. Beyond 2022, it's going to be really, really tough. But between now and 2020, we definitely, in my opinion, have the window to get this stuff merged. We have so much tech on the way. This article does such a great job of actually going through and explaining all of the different technologies that we have. And even Francis went and very kindly listed a couple that wasn't on the article. So definitely make sure you guys follow Francis if you want some more information on this stuff. It's really great, but it's getting, in my opinion, it's getting really, really obvious to, I think, the rest of the world, that, or at least to the rest of the crypto space, that Bitcoin is becoming, more and more private, that Bitcoin can actually become a privacy coin in a sense, because like Francis said, layer 2 Lightning could have been called like darknet or something like that, right? Because it is encrypted by default, but it's not. It's called Lightning Network, and it is the order of magnitude scaling solution that Bitcoin needs, but it is also the privacy solution that Bitcoin needs. And Lightning, I don't think, was mentioned in this article, but it is an imperative, very, very, very important part of privacy in Bitcoin, going forward in the future. And, there's a couple of these different technologies that I like, specifically Schnorr signatures. That is going to be really, really powerful. I talk about this, in other podcasts about how you can aggregate now thousands of signatures into a single signature with this type of technology, which is going to create huge amounts of privacy and huge amounts of scalability, huge amounts of efficiency. It's going to be, it is widely regarded as the best signature scheme right now, in crypto. So that is going to be great. That pretty much enables Graftroot, Taproot, and scriptless scripts as well. So I mean, there's all sorts of privacy tech, specifically scriptless scripts, guys. That is going to be some amazing stuff, especially when combined with the Lightning Network. I highly recommend everybody check out the recent Lightning hackathon that just happened. That goes into detail with some of these technologies. But Tumblebit is on there as well. Tumblebit, in my opinion, is not really going to probably, it's sort of been usurped by newer privacy technologies, but Tumblebit was really, really cool and is still actually usable today. Even Nicolas Doyer, the creator of the NBitcoin library, created a a version of this for .NET using NBitcoin. It's actually called NTubbleBit, and you can use this right now. You can check it out because Nopera73, Adam Fiskor, actually took that code and made Wasabi wallet. So he's now working on Chaumium Coinjoins, which is also mentioned in this article. Really, really great, powerful technology. The ability to join your coins together so that nobody can in many transactions together in one big transaction, so that nobody can actually know where the bits came from, where the amounts came from, both coming in and out. So that's really, really important. And there's other stuff mentioned too here, like Francis said, BIP 158 encrypted communication to the nodes. Really, really important. There's something called Stonewall, which is a little bit newer. I'm not too familiar with it, but there's just so much out there, guys. And I think it's getting to be really, really obvious. And again, I think we need to do it now before it's too late. And just a quick note on why I think that privacy by default entirely on the blockchain on the first layer is not such a good idea. Like just complete privacy, like something like Zcash or even Grin, is simply because Francis touched on it a little bit, is because you can't audit everything. The whole mantra about Bitcoin is to don't trust, verify. That's the whole big part. We want to be able to verify our transactions. And when you have something like Zcash where you can't even detect if inflation is happening, it gets to be a little bit too private. We need to have amazing privacy, and there's some technology that's coming out like scriptless scripts where you can do crazy multi-sig transactions and have it look like a regular standard transaction. That's powerful. So that's the type of privacy that we need, instead of actually just completely privacying the entire chain, because then again, if you don't know what's going on under the hood, how are you supposed to fix the engine? So how are you supposed to know that the engine is really churning properly? So that's just my bit on that. I'm going to go through the guests real quick and see if they have any final points on this topic. So let's go with Ragnar first. Ragnar, did you have any final points on this discussion before we move on?
Thanks. So 3 quick points. One about SPV versus full nodes, another one about wallets, and a third one about altcoins. So the first one, Francis brought up a good point, which is, most people use SPV wallets. And so that is actually will get the biggest impact for the largest number of users first. And it's easy to say, well, this technology is so cool or so comprehensive. But if it's only for full node users, that's great for us who run those. But for kind of your average person, it doesn't really help them. So it's nice to see there's different layers for different users, different strategies. If one fails, if you don't like this one, you could use another one. Now, the downside is maybe it's confusing what's what, but over time, I think it's going to congeal. My second point about wallets is, and maybe this is more kind of a negative thing, but there's different wallets trying different things. The good part of that is, you can see what works best. The bad part is, every wallet doesn't have everything, and maybe you have to choose a wallet. Maybe you're confused about this wallet. And wallets usually don't have a great, financing mechanism. So sometimes looking at them long term makes me a little nervous, because a lot of them seem to develop out of passion and skill and knowledge, which is great. So kind of some upside and downside to sort of a wallet-based thing. And then real quick, my last point in terms of like altcoins. For a long time, a lot of us have said that, Bitcoin is going to be the winner, and there might be a second or a third place, but all these altcoins ultimately are going to go away or have a small share. The counter argument was that, well, Bitcoin isn't private, so we need private coin. Bitcoin isn't fast enough for buying coffee, but now we're seeing with the Lightning Network for fast transactions, with all these privacy enhancements, it's starting to become, the prophecy is becoming true, right? Where we're actually seeing results. So why are you going to need privacy coins? Why are you going to need quick transactions if Bitcoin really is going to accumulate these second layer applications? So I just can't believe how great of a state Bitcoin is right now.
Great points. Great points, Ragnar. I mean, we really do have to make the privacy easy, and again, it does take away the main use case for some of these privacy coins, right? Like, why would we go on some of these Zcash, these other privacy coins like Monero, when we have the world's store of value that is Bitcoin, and we can have privacy on top of it? That that is the win. That's why we've been trying to tell. That's why a lot of Bitcoin maximalists have been trying to tell people for a long time that, look, if you guys are patient enough, Bitcoin will have every one of these features that are on these other coins. Because there is incentive to do so. Specifically with around privacy. That's an obvious incentive that we need to do. That it's an obvious win that I think the most of the network will enjoy. So we're going to continue, building that type of technology into Bitcoin. And I just thought it was great points, Ragnar. Like, why do we need these other, Zcash and things like that when we have Bitcoin? So great points. Let's go to Stefan. Did you have any final points on this discussion?
Yep, thank you. I do have a couple points to make here. One point I think we should know is that there's a cat and mouse game here, right? If you think about the way security works, that's also a phenomenon that we notice in that world as well. So for example, when bank websites, some hackers would try to get your password for that, they might have a keylogger, but then the banks tried to stop that by then saying, okay, well, you don't type a password and click on the screen some numbers as well. But then the hackers would then try and do keylogging and screen capturing, right? So taking that analogy into privacy, we have to consider that there's always going to be an escalating battle in terms of, the people on the side of trying to increase the world's, privacy for everybody, and then the chain analysis and these sorts of companies and these sorts of people who will try to reduce that level of privacy and try to reintroduce things like blacklisting and impinging on the fungibility of Bitcoin. So it is also important to help people basically to win hearts and minds. And I think there was a really good point made by Beauty on Akin on Twitter recently that privacy should not be thought of as like, oh, these deep dark criminals and these ninjas, and it should be seen as framed in a positive light. Everyone should have privacy by default. That is the way that we should think about these things, and not just like, oh, the only reason you need privacy is if you're some dodgy anarchist, evil person. It's actually, we all need privacy. So that's kind of the
real quick. When you say privacy by default, I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. Privacy by default, for example, like in the application layer, maybe not privacy by default on the first chain layer, right? As I was saying earlier, a little bit, it might be a little bit hard to tweak the engine if you don't know what the heck is going on. So I think I think you mean privacy by default at the application layer, and certainly above layer 1.
Yes, that's what I would think. And the other point I just wanted to echo is just, it may be also difficult to implement privacy onto layer 1. I think Adam Fixor made a point about this in terms of if confidential transactions were to be implemented on Bitcoin, it could be harder to detect silent inflation, which is also the point that Francis was making earlier. So that's another thing to consider there.
Absolutely great point, Stefan. All right, and finally, I guess we'll go with Francis here. Francis, you kind of already had a lot of information to give, but I'm not sure what else you want to follow that up with. But before we end the topic, but the floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, I have a few points. So SPVs is definitely one of the weak points of Bitcoin privacy. I think Ragnar was really he was on point there. I remember a few years back, I met with the Canadian equivalent of the FBI for a day of roundtable talking about Bitcoin privacy, and they were really definitely aware of Electrum, right? And they were aware that they were kind of telling us, since the Electrum client is sending all these addresses and Bloom filters to the server, all we need to do is if we can spy on your internet connection, we can see that your Electrum client from your IP is sending all these addresses to the server, so we know who they belong to. And the important part is the way that Electrum works. Even if you use Tor or VPN on your computer, if there's a single moment where you don't, those addresses will get actually leaked. So if someone's sniffing your internet for some reason, in Canada they weren't allowed to legally do that. In the US, I'm pretty sure they are doing that. So that's a really important point. And regarding the wallets are terrible in Bitcoin. The hosted wallets are really, really bad. If you look like blockchain.info, it's a complete and utter disgrace. And wallet developers, they don't just code UX, they also embed best practices about how to use Bitcoin within the user experience. And they've embedded really terrible best practices. I'm pretty confident that the hosted kind of VC-funded Silicon Valley web wallets are soon going to get disrupted, because their only advantage was kind of the usability. And you got some guys like Nopara who are working on the back-end stuff, the really hardcore privacy tech, but you got guys like us at Satoshi Portal and other companies that are really, really focused on making the best practices, the best and easiest seamless UX possible, and embedding those right values in the software. Because the guys developing those wallets that are the well-funded guys, they don't have any values regarding Bitcoin. And the guys like Samurai, the guys like Nopara, even though they're not well-funded now, honestly, you can replicate blockchain.info's infrastructure for $100 grand, and if you want some work, it's actually not that difficult to build a really good wallet. What's difficult is getting that user adoption. Another thing is for the altcoins, it is such a dumb idea to think that you can move to Bitcoin, transact in your sketchy stuff on the altcoin and then move to Bitcoin, because no one uses like Monero and stays in Monero, right? No one's like, some people will switch to Monero, go on the dark web, and then go back to Bitcoin. But then you're going through a coin-to-coin exchange. Like, there is no decentralized exchange right now that people are using. I'm sure some of the criminals are going out of the way to use decentralized exchanges, perhaps. But then all that's doing is like all that Monero traffic is condensed into like a few exchanges where they're exchanging those Monero for Bitcoins. And regardless of whether that exchange is in another country or whatever, if you have like an exchange account and you're exchanging Monero for Bitcoin, even though you're not like KYC'd, like, and we'll talk about that later, like everyone's going to be KYC'd, but your IP is still there and there's still ways to track you. And finally, another thing that like, why does privacy matter? Okay, so I have a payment processor, right? So I receive a lot of Bitcoins. And even though I'm not, there's no like legal KYC requirement for us right now, like our banking partners actually ask us, they're asking us to start thinking about implementing coin tracking, for example. So the way it works is when you receive transactions from users, like most of the regulatory requirements, they ask you to flag certain transactions as suspicious. And how do you flag an incoming Bitcoin transaction as suspicious? Where you do some blockchain analysis on that transaction, and they're going to say, oh, well, it looks like it may have been mixed. That's really the only thing that we can determine. Like, I'm not going to know that it's coming from a dark web exchange. Perhaps if the guy is like super dumb and the dark web exchange is super terrible at privacy, it could be technically possible to know that it's coming directly from a darknet market. But really, it just asks you, is that transaction like, does that transaction look like it's just been mixed? So this is a way that they're asking us, like, make a distinction between transactions that that are not mixed and transactions that have been mixed. So my solution to that is just to mix all the coins all the time. If we mix all the coins all the time, there's no distinction to be made. When you're mixing coins, you're not like washing coins. You're not like like laundering the coins. What you're doing is you're just mixing dirty Bitcoins with other dirty Bitcoins. So if everybody's mixing Bitcoins with dirty Bitcoins all the time, it's impossible to make a distinction. And then they tell us if it's been mixed, flag it as suspicious. And eventually I'll just say, well, that's dumb because every single transaction is now suspicious, which defeats the purpose. So this is kind of like corporate behavior that people that are running large economic nodes that are taking a lot of inputs from their users and sending them elsewhere. I think this is something that the businesses should be doing. And this is certainly something that I'm thinking about doing, is just mixing massively all the coins that I'm receiving so that everybody's dirty coins are with everybody's clean coins. And yeah, I think this is something that might be one of the ways to kind of thwart those suspicious flags that KYC requirements KYC rules are asking for.
Yeah, Francis, that's a great point. I've got one point just to add to that, actually. I was reading on the Samurai wallet page, and they've got a technology called Stonewall. And it's related because what it does is it adds an additional 4 hops to the transaction before going to the intended recipient. And in doing so, it increases the cost for a chain analysis company that now has to search further hops back in the chain. So that's another example.
Absolutely. And that Stonewall was mentioned in this article. So definitely check that out, guys. That's some pretty interesting stuff. I haven't looked fully into that yet, but man, that sounds amazing. Again, just whatever we can do to stop the analysis, to just, stonewall the chain analysis. So that would be great. And, great points made by everybody. I mean, this privacy thing is a cat and mouse game. It is a constant back and forth. But look, privacy tech is here. Layer 2 is encrypted by default. It is private by default. And we have amazing new technologies coming down the road, as this article illustrates, Schnorr, Taproot, Graph-root, scriptless scripts, side chains, and then of course confidential transactions, all of this stuff and more. I mean, Dandelion and more, all of this stuff and more is coming to Bitcoin because there is demand, there is incentive, and there are people that are willing to get this done. They are willing to, forego employment, forego money, whatever it takes. Because remember, a lot of these Bitcoin people now, these old school Bitcoiners, have a little bit of capital to play with now. And so, and as Bitcoin continues to rise in price and continues to rise in utility, they will only gain more in value. So very, very awesome points, guys. Really glad to get everybody's points on this. I'm hoping, I'm really, really hopeful for the future and for privacy on Bitcoin. I'm really looking forward to that stuff. So, all right. So I think we can move on to the next topic. But before we do that, please, if you guys are new to the channel, please hit the subscribe button. And if you like what you guys are seeing, hit that thumbs up button. And if you guys don't like it, maybe hit the thumbs down button. But we're definitely going to be here for a while. So hopefully you guys like what you see. And then, of course, if you guys are listening on the audio broadcast, we do screen share and we do this live on YouTube. But if you guys are listening to the audio version, please, if you can, give us a 5-star review on iTunes. We would really appreciate it. We're trying to get more and more people listening to the audio as well. So with that aside, let's go ahead and move on to the next topic of the day, which is Shapeshift is ending their anonymity. I can never say that word. Damn it. Shapeshift is ending their anonymous ways with their announcement of the mandatory KYC data collection. So I want to get the panel's thoughts on this. This is, upsetting to a lot of Bitcoiners, to a lot of crypto people out there in the space. Shapeshift pioneered essentially the no account, the ability to go ahead and switch coins and transfer coins and swap coins without the need for any actual KYC or account creation. So let's go with Stefan first on this. Stefan, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, is this a big lose for the for the space in general, or is this just going to be business as usual in the future?
So I think coming back to almost related to that cat and mouse game, it's that over time, regulators and governments want to get their piece of the pie or their pound of flesh. So anything that gets big enough, any centralized, and as Nick Szabo has famously said, trusted third parties are a security hole. However, what happens over time is as a service gets started, it gets bigger and bigger, and then the government wants to drop the hammer. So, I was a little disappointed, but, Eric Voorhees is one of those guys who used to be a kind of really, really great maximalist libertarian guy. And now it seems like, even the state has forced him to basically, bend the knee to all the KYC and all the regulation. And one of the difficulties with that is it is incredibly hard to comply with a lot of these quote unquote financial crimes laws. There are just a range. So there's AML, anti-money laundering. There's things like anti-bribery and corruption that require you to screen your customers, and AML as well. You have to screen customers. There's things like FATCA, Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, and then there's another one called CRS, Common Reporting Standards, right? So through all of these different, battery of financial crimes regulations, they impose a huge cost on businesses, and it's very difficult for them to comply. And you'll notice many large banks have fallen afoul of the regulator. And banks pretty much live in fear of losing their license to operate by losing their banking license, because we live in such highly regulated and controlled societies. I think the final point I would just make is it's going to be a little bit like the Pirate Bay. I think what we're going to see is constant shutdowns and someone starting up a new version. So it's unfortunate that Shapeshift are going this way, but what I think is the likely outcome is increased use of decentralized exchanges such as BISC and so on, and then other alternatives popping up and trying to do a similar service. But all of this stuff is really just kind of, these are temporary things on the path to hyper-Bitcoinization. So that's kind of how I think about it.
On the path to hyper-Bitcoinization. I like it, Stefan. I like it. Definitely have to agree with a couple of the points. It's really unfortunate, but I want to hear a bit more from everybody else. Let's ask Ragnar. Ragnar, what are your thoughts on the discussion so far, and this really this kind of dying of an era almost? I mean, do you foresee this being the norm in the future, or are we going? Is this going to unleash a whole new slew of decentralized no KYC services?
Yeah, KYC, AML, and all the things that Stefan mentioned are absolutely inevitable. I think, a lot of people realized that years ago, and you could even say 20 years ago. I mean, kind of one of the central fundamental ethos of cypherpunkology, if I could make up that word, is that you code, cypherpunks code, right? So you don't try to lobby and convince people. You have to build things in such a way that they're out of reach of whatever laws and enforcement and regulators want to do. Bitcoin is the obvious example for that. And so, to me, like KYC, AML, Shapeshift, it doesn't really like even move the needle for me personally, because I think a lot of people like me, we guessed that this was going to happen. It was just a matter of time. And this dovetails well into our previous topic of having to build, privacy into it. So no, it doesn't really bother me. And yes, the future, this is just pushing forward, like you said, pushing forward the impetus to create these privacy tools and, these best practices, like Francis said, that's an underrated thing of having the best practices. And it's going to be this war of how quickly can we develop the software tools that are built in that can't be uncensored, BISC network as well, and other things, versus how hard are they going to crack down on the exchanges? Because now there's not a lot of exchanges left. I mean, even local Bitcoins went that way. So yeah, I agree with those and just want to make those points.
Yep, great points, Ragnar. Great points. All right, let's go with Francis next to see what he says on this. I'm pretty curious to see what you say, Francis, because I think you're not. I got a feeling you're not very happy.
Well, ironically, I sympathize and empathize with Eric on this, and I'll echo what Ragnar and Stefan said. I think Shapeshift had a good run, and I think it was inevitable. And I do think there are things that we don't know about why Shapeshift is doing that. But first, maybe a little bit of context. Like, a lot of people were outraged on Twitter, and they kind of went after Shapeshift in a really hard way. And I don't think it's necessarily because people think that they should have not caved to KYC AML. I think it's because Shapeshift was driving the SegWit2x fork from the beginning. They may have been, they definitely were one of the early 2 or 3 companies that came up with it. They may have been the actual initiator of SegWit2x. People don't really remember that, but before SegWit2x, there was something called SegWit2MB, which later became SegWit2x. So I think part of the outrage, we shouldn't mistake the outrage against Shapeshift for outrage against just the inevitability of KYC AML, because it was always going to happen from the beginning. So I did tweet out to Eric, and I was like, in Canada, for example, right now, there is no KYC AML regulation in force. So companies like mine, we have to do KYC AML for 2 reasons. The number one is if we're accepting fiat payments, and people don't realize that. Like, the KYC AML, if you're accepting fiat payments, is to make sure you don't get defrauded by a chargeback. There's many reasons why. There's many reasons how Bitcoin businesses just get completely wrecked with fraud. First of all, if you're a user and you send money to an exchange from your bank account, you can just literally call up the bank like 5 minutes later and say, I didn't do that. It wasn't me. Someone hacked my account. And then the bank will take your side, and literally the exchange might get charged back, and you get your money back and the Bitcoins. Obviously, if you do get hacked, if your bank account does get hacked, and you send money to an exchange, and the hacker sends money to an exchange, you will get a chargeback. So a lot of the exchanges will KYC the people to make sure that whoever is the person who's receiving the Bitcoins is also the owner of the bank account, and they want proof that the person who sent the money is the one who got the Bitcoins in case there's a chargeback. The other reasons why a lot of Bitcoin companies do KYC AML is because if they don't, they will never get a banking relationship. And if you're running an off-ramp or on-ramp like we are, we don't have a choice but to do KYC AML. Legally, I'm not obliged to, but I have to, because if I don't do KYC AML, there's nobody who's going to give me payment processing, and then there's not going to be any on-ramp or off-ramp into Bitcoin. And so going back to Canada, I tweeted to Eric. I was like, Canada doesn't have crypto-to-crypto KYC laws, and there's no risk of chargeback. And you don't need banking relationships, so why don't you just make a Canadian subsidiary to do your crypto to crypto, and at least make crypto to crypto, remove the KYC AML for Canadians. And he tweeted back, unbelievably, it wouldn't solve my problem, and it's not something I can talk about. So I am aware of Bitcoin companies that decided to just shut down instead of doing KYC. Eric was the big opponent of, other than SegWit2x, he was a big opponent of, for example, the BitLicense. He did a lot of good things for Bitcoin. He actually was like he did like a website called protectconsumers.org or something like that. So I'm quite confident that he tried as much as he could. And as Stefan said, we live in a world of trade-offs. Shapeshift, the trade-off is you're going to get de-anonymized. And the benefit is that there's really high liquidity on that. So you can just dump any kind of shitcoin there. And you can, be pretty convinced that you're going to get Bitcoins pretty quickly. If you prefer anonymity more than you prefer quickly available liquidity, you can go on Bisq. So yeah, I think Shapeshift had a good run. I'm confident they did as much as they can. Perhaps they could have moved to like Curacao and run their operation there. But realistically, some people have been in the space for 6-7 years and they tried their best. And at some point, they'll just say, you know what, there's other cypherpunks doing anonymous stuff. We've been trying our hardest. So I'm definitely with Eric on this one. And I don't think he should get too much flag for that. Because it's going to happen to everyone else that's centralized, and that's not in a jurisdiction where they can, and that has employees. Even if you're like in Panama or Curacao, like you have employees in the States, you have business in the States, you have a house there. At some point, it becomes pretty difficult to stand for your principles. And yeah, that's it for that.
Yeah, great points, Francis. I mean, there are trade-offs in this industry. There always is. There's trade-offs in every industry, and I have to agree with the panelists. It sounds like everybody here is pretty convinced that this was an inevitability, that this was going to come about once Bitcoin reaches maturity. Once we have enough liquidity in the system, that the banks are going to start paying attention. Because remember, the AML laws were all part of the Bank Secrecy Act of 1970. FinCEN is kind of like the main designated administrator. They're the ones that sort of went after Shapeshift. And it's really interesting to see that, Eric tweet back saying that he can't, there's stuff that we don't know that he can't say. Because again, guys, this goes back, almost a century now, like these types of banking laws, these types of banking institutions, people just sort of think that they have all the power in the world because they've been there forever. Because they've been there for so long. But I want people to understand that that's not the case. Even though we have these huge conglomerates like like the central banks, like Federal Reserve, like the BSA, like FinCEN, this stuff is now finally having real competition with Bitcoin and crypto. And they're not going to be able to keep the lid on it forever. They're going to do their best. They're going to shut down people like Eric, with this KYC. They're going to, force local Bitcoins to go ahead and do KYC as well. But, the vast majority of winning is like in our favor. We have the entirety of the internet. We have the entirety of the internet at our disposal. And we have all of this amazing privacy tech coming down, and we have demand. So in my opinion, it's really only a matter of time that these people like the BSA and like FinCEN will be able to kind of throw their weight around. But as Francis said, there are trade-offs right now. There are companies that need banking relationships. They need to be able to deal with fiat because that's the world that we live in. But I'm just a wide-eyed idealist. I guess I just can't wait to look forward to the day, when we really don't need traditional banking relationships. Because as we'll get into our next story, the kids these days, they're going more towards crypto than fiat. So that's really important. And I just want to also echo one more important point that Francis said about SegWit2x. There was a lot of hostility towards Eric around this KYC issue, because of the SegWit2x last year. Like that was a general large amount of the people that was throwing hate his way, basically. And I was one of those people as well, because I like to continuously remind the community of the SegWit2x, of the battle that happened last year, of the user-activated soft fork. I want people to know who supported 2x. I want people to remember this. And so, there are tweets that go around that I tweet and retweet and to have people remember. So Eric's company was one of the companies pushing forward SegWit2x very, very strongly. And so, this is, I just want to mention that out there so people are aware of this. And, this is the world we live in. And so I'm just really looking forward to the future where we don't have to worry quite as much about this type of stuff. But Francis does have one final point. So I want to go to him. Francis, please go ahead.
Just regarding the flag that he's getting for SegWit2x, I think it's a very good thing. And I'm going to give flag to all of these guys for, they're going to need to work hard to redeem themselves in my favor. I'm sure a lot of viewers know the concept of skin in the game. I would encourage everyone to read the book Skin in the Game. Why? Because if your opinion has no consequence. You don't have any skin in the game, and you externalize costs on others. And as we see in the blockchain industry, no one is feeling the consequence for externalizing costs on others. And I think this is hugely immoral. So the least that we can do to bring back balance is that if you have a bad opinion, you're going to get flagged for it on Twitter. Perhaps you're not going to lose customers. Perhaps no one's going to do anything. Perhaps you're not going to get shut down. You know, like Jihan, for example, he made terrible decisions with Bcash. He might get bailed out with his IPO, but we're all calling him out on Twitter, and it's just the least we can do. So companies that go against, you know, the Bitcoin ethos, that have decisions that put risk on others, they need to be called out as loud and often as we can, so that the next time they have a stupid opinion that risks to destroy Bitcoin. And remember that if Eric had gotten this way, the Bitcoin network would have gone down for the first time ever. The Bitcoin network would have gone down if Shapeshift had gotten his way, and they're still in business. All right, so they're not going to go out of business.
Think about that, guys. Think about what Francis said. But go ahead, Francis. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and so call them out so that next time they make their decision, they're not going to say, oh well, you know, this is crypto and everyone experimenting and it's no one's fault and it's society's fault because we don't know. And you know, everybody's doing the Bob Rubin trade. I don't know if you read Anti-Fragile. The Bob Rubin trade is you make like you sweep fragility under the rug, and then once there's a black swan that happens, you're like, oh, whoops, you know, nobody could have predicted, and everybody forgives them, and you know, everybody kind of forgets that. So you know, let's never forget what these companies did, so that at least the next time they may think twice before doing that.
Yep, great points. And we're going to go to Ragnar in just 1 second. But I just want to make, you know, one final point about this article is that it does offer the opportunity and the hope of gaining more decentralized solutions, because again, you know, Nicolas Doyer, the creator of the Bitcoin library and who teaches the programming with Bitcoin.com course with me, you know, he already on Twitter is saying that, look, maybe it's time for us to create a decentralized version of Shapeshift, because this is the same kid, Nicolas Doyer, who said, you know what, I'm going to fork BitPay. He was not happy with BitPay. I'm going to fork you and make an open source solution available. And he did it in 2 weeks. Okay. So this is the community that you don't want to mess with. And so we have, in my opinion, hopefully, you know, I think this will create a whole new incentive, create a whole new generation of more decentralized apps. I think that Nicola is going to maybe put forth one of those, but I hope that the community is listening. I hope that somebody else puts forth some type of you know, open source decentralized solution to Shapeshift, because you know, there is demand. There's so many wallets and applications that have Shapeshift built in that don't want to worry about this KYC. So I hope that there's somebody out there like Nicola that will you know, create some type of open source alternative to Shapeshift, so that we can, you know, continue using it the way that we want to, the way that we want to use it, the way that Eric wants us, you know, to use it. So Ragnar, let's go with you. You had a couple of final points.
Yeah, so I agree with you guys on Eric Voorhees. I've given him a hard time from last year, this year. He hasn't blocked me yet. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I think he named Shapeshift after himself because the way he always tries to get away with things and re-explain things and couch things. Anyways, not to focus on the negative, but yeah. So two points on this. You know, besides these software tools, you know, that we need, we also need like the hardware tools, and that's why I love Open Dime, because it's an alternative, right? And it's especially good for, I think, you know, smaller transactions, call it OTC, over-the-counter transactions, maybe people that you know, a local Bitcoin, people could do that. So just, you know, wanted to mention that, because we just have to have, you know, all the tools that we can, and you know, so kind of those 2 points, I guess.
Absolutely, it's true. You know, we're all in this together, so we need to make sure, you know, that we are putting the community's best foot forward, right? That we have the community, that we have Bitcoin itself at best at heart. And you know, I interviewed, we had somebody on the show, Will Payman. We had Will Payman on the show on a crypto Q&A show earlier this week, and you know, he was defending Eric pretty hard, and that's fine. But you know, at the end of the day, look, guys, I mean, we as Francis said, if you guys push forward things that are bad, net negatives for the whole entire network, you know, you will be brought to bear. We are going to hold you accountable for those actions. So Francis got one final small point. Francis, go ahead.
So Ragnar mentioned the cypherpunk movement, and the cypherpunk ethos is that if I want privacy in my communication, I cannot have privacy for myself if the person I'm talking to doesn't have privacy as well, right? So you really need to conceive this. It's not about the greater good of Bitcoin, and it's not about changing the world. Although, for some people it is, but ultimately, if we want to have privacy and trustlessness for ourselves, and other people don't have the tools or are incapable of running the tools, and if the tools are super damn hard and you need to have command line and none of your friends are going to be able to use them, then you're not going to have privacy, all right? You're going to be private with your other cypherpunk buddies on the internet, and that sucks. So building privacy tools for the users is just self-interest.
Absolutely. I mean, if we don't build them for people to use them, if we don't build them with good user interfaces and with good user experiences, then no users are going to use them. So, very good point, Francis. We do need, privacy for everybody. And as you say, if only one person has privacy in a sea of thousands and thousands, then they really don't have privacy. So it becomes really easy to track. So, great points, Francis. I think we can go ahead and move on to our final topic of the evening, unless anybody else has anything else on this? No? Okay, cool. Very cool. All right, guys. So again, if you are new to the channel, please, we ask that you hit that subscribe button. And if you guys like what you're seeing, please hit that thumbs up button. We really appreciate it. And if you guys are listening on the audio feed, we do have an audio feed available for you on iTunes and RSS. We ask that you please give us a 5-star review on iTunes if you guys think that we merit that. So let's move on to our final topic of the evening. It looks like there has been a couple of new surveys that have been put out across the country here in the US. And I think there's some of the survey is actually surveying the rest of the world too. But basically what they're finding here is that more and more people are becoming bullish on crypto, specifically the millennials, specifically the younger crowd, where these studies and surveys are finding that a lot of these millennials will actually rather hold crypto entirely exclusively as opposed to dealing with the traditional financial system. So let's go with Stefan first on this. Actually, let's go with Stefan first. We haven't gone with Stefan first yet. So Stefan, let's go with you first. What is your comments on these polls and these surveys? Do you think because you're in the space pretty heavily? You've interviewed a lot of people, Stefan. You have a great podcast. What do you think from on the ground? Are these surveys accurate? Is this what you're seeing out there in the community?
Okay, well, I would say just generally with millennials, they have a level of disillusionment with the generations above. They sense in many places around the world, particularly here in Australia, a lot of millennials sense that they've been kind of locked out of the property market because the boomers and so on, like generations above them, had got all this access to property kind of before all the big debt bubbles of the world had started blowing. So that's one factor. I wouldn't necessarily say that many people I talk to are like, yeah, I want to go and buy a Bitcoin, but I think it's a slow and gradual process, right? So some people are in the traditional finance world. I saw a tweet the other day and it was kind of joking that the typical, you got two kind of archetypes. You got the indexers who are trying to do FIRE, financial independence, retire early, and then the other side who are like the crypto and the YOLO generation, right? But once we sort of move away from that framing and people start thinking of it in terms of, oh, hey, all I need is a small allocation to Bitcoin. I don't necessarily have to go all in, right? So, and we're seeing research on that very topic. So Matthew Beck of Grayscale came out with a paper talking about moving into a new digital frontier, and he was basically pointing out that all you need is a small 1 to 5% allocation, aside from the standard kind of stocks and bonds portfolio, and people got a really great return out of that. The last point I would just make is just around mental capture. So it's like, this is a point that I've heard VJ make, and he made this on my podcast as well. He was talking about how once people have kind of been really caught into it, then every time they see it, it's now just coming back. And over time, and this is kind of ties into like the Lindy effect that people like Nassim Taleb or even Pierre Rochard mentions in relation to Bitcoin. The longer it survives, the longer it's been around, the more chance it will have of broader adoption. So that's how I would summarize my thoughts.
Great points. Yeah, the Lindy effect is holding true. Bitcoin's been around for 10 years now, and it's really true about these millennials not being very happy about how things are playing out for them. A lot of them are like, why didn't I have access to the Facebook IPO, right? A lot of them are like, why didn't how come my parents lost their house in the financial crisis in 2008, right? So there's a lot of questions going on, and it's understandable that more and more surveys are saying that more and more banks or more and more millennials are hating banks. I think there's plenty of surveys about that out there as well. So let's go with Ragnar next. Ragnar, what is your comments on this article so far? Do you think that more and more people are turning to crypto?
Yeah. So 2 points on that. Seeing this disillusionment is sad, but it's encouraging because the more people who become disillusioned will seek alternatives to the existing financial system. So we're seeing that with Bitcoin, both because obviously they grew up with technology, but also just their disillusionment and not seeing much to gain. And my second point is that there's sort of this saying in science, I'm going to butcher it, but basically science advances as each generation dies. So in science, people sort of reject radical worldviews that contradicts their 20, 30 years in the field. It's kind of in their interest to do so. So just like this is the same with Bitcoin and all these other kind of related tools, the older generation who A, didn't grow up with this technology, and B, have done okay on the current system, are comfortable with it, don't want to change, they don't have as much reason to change, whereas this younger generation does, for all the reasons that I just said. So this is just, people have to be patient and understand this isn't a 2-year project, a 5-year project. We got to think in terms of 100 years, a century. We have to think of in terms, how long have fiat currencies lasted? A century or two, and we're just almost 10 years into this. So even though there's so many things exciting happening almost every week or every month, and we've come so far, when we think of this generation moving up, a generation is 10, 20 years. That's just so amazing. So this is very encouraging. It's the opposite of Facebook, where Facebook is losing this generation. So hey, I'm happy they're unhappy.
Great points, Ragnar. He is happy that they are unhappy. I mean, we should be unhappy with the cards that are being dealt, by this traditional financial system that seeks to only prop up a few, only prop up the small percentage of people. So great points, Ragnar. Let's go with Francis on this. Francis, what are your thoughts on these articles so far and the conversation so far?
Well, yeah, I'm happy to see those numbers. So I think it was like 4 or 5 months ago. I'm an advisor to the Ontario Securities Commission, and they commissioned a study in Ontario to determine what's the percentage of Ontarian population that owns cryptocurrency. And I think it was maybe even a longer time than that, maybe 6-7 months ago. And the survey said 5%. And then I tweeted about that, and everybody was calling bullshit. And then the Central Bank of Canada did a survey that was Canada-wide with a larger sampling. And the survey was a few months later, and it was 5%. And then the Ontario Securities Commission did a new survey, another survey. I think the first time was like 4.4%, and now it's 5%. So you have 2 government agencies with 3 different surveys that are showing 5% of Canadians that own Bitcoin. And then I saw another number, and my thinking on that evolved a little bit more. So I saw in Canada that 0.5% of Canadians own more than 10 Bitcoins. So I was like, "Oh, this is a nice country to be in." Why is it a nice country to be in? Well, before I got on Twitter, I was at a help desk. So I ran a help desk for 3 years, and a Bitcoin help desk on Montreal's most busy street with a big glass window and huge Bitcoin signs. So I would come in at 9 in the morning and just sit there and do my stuff, and people would walk in and they would buy Bitcoins from me with cash, and I would install their wallets. So I saw Bitcoin adoption. And my thinking evolved a little bit over time, a lot actually. I used to be Mr. Adoption. I wanted everyone to use Bitcoin. And now I want the best of society and the smartest and the most committed people to use Bitcoin, because it doesn't really matter the amount of Bitcoiners out there so much as the quality of Bitcoiners, because ultimately adoption is not about you dumping your bags on more people. Adoption is about having other people's skin in your game. You have skin in the game in Bitcoin, and you want other people to have skin in the game because you will have automatically the same interests. So What I've been seeing over time is just there is an incredible amount of highly sophisticated, highly motivated, highly resourceful people that are into Bitcoin. And this is the most bullish thing that I could ever think of. You know, I think another interesting statistic is, so that's, by the way, that's 2 million Canadians, right? So 2 million Canadians have Bitcoin. So if you have 5% of people, and you know, Bitcoin is a red pill. There's no turning back, right? So that's another thing. When you get into Bitcoin, it is fun. To me, your brain rewires. Like the way that you think, it's completely changes, and then you have a new outlook on life. And when you own a decent amount of Bitcoins, let's say you own like one Bitcoin, say you own 10 grand worth of Bitcoin, you have one Bitcoin or something like that. I don't know what's the price of Bitcoin now, 6 grand or whatever. But let's say that you own one Bitcoin or 2 Bitcoins. And let's say that in the future, let's say in 3 years, right, a Bitcoin is going to be 20 grand. So what is the most important issue in your life politically? Protecting your Bitcoins, right? So this is what matters to me. If you have 5% of the population, just think about, in Canada, there is a trade war with the US over dairy farms, over dairy. And we might actually get kicked out of NAFTA because the government isn't compromising on dairy. Why? Because of public choice theory. Everybody in Bitcoin needs to learn about public choice theory. What does public choice theory mean? Is that if you have a very small group that has a really important issue, and the cost to all others in society is really small, right? So nobody's going to take the streets to ban Bitcoin. But people are going to take the streets if Bitcoiners are going to take the streets if they ban Bitcoin. And Bitcoiners' families are going to take the streets, and Bitcoiners' friends are going to take the streets. And if you have, you know, a core of really dedicated Bitcoiners that have a huge interest in Bitcoin, that's massive. And another really cool fact that I like is, you know, I'm sure these demographics are different elsewhere because Canada has a declining population, but about 12%, 13% of Canadians have never lived in a world without Bitcoin. I'm pretty sure that about 20%, you know, since in developing countries you have a lot more young kids, I'm willing to bet that 25% of people have never lived in a world where Bitcoin didn't exist. And you know, in 10 years, you're going to have maybe 35% of the population that never lived in a world where Bitcoin hasn't existed. So, you know, it's not about adoption at all costs. It's about, for me, it has become about targeted adoption. And for me also, it has become about cohesion of the Bitcoiners together. So what makes me more bullish is that Bitcoin maximalism is trending AF. And I know that because a lot of the other Bitcoin maximalists and I have shared our Twitter impressions. I mean, I don't want to publish my Twitter impressions because that's a bit pompous, but I have exchanged Twitter impressions with some of the other Bitcoin maximalists to see if they're trending and to see, like, I've become a fucking massively maximalist. Like, I mean, I became like, you know, I just said, you know, no more compromise. I'm fucking all in now. And my Twitter impressions have skyrocketed. So that makes me extremely bullish on the adoption level.
Very awesome. Very awesome. Yeah, it's, you know, once you get up to, you know, over 25 to 50,000 followers, you're going to be getting into the millions of impressions. So we can definitely guess, Francis, that it's going to be in the millions, what you got going on over there, because it's definitely the millions for me. So I'm sure it's, you know, the millions for.
Let's say that 3 or 4 Bitcoin maximalists have about 25 million impressions a month.
Yep. So and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing, again, you know, with the Bitcoin dominance, we're seeing it in the media, we're seeing it in the news. Hey, maybe these ICOs weren't such a good idea. Maybe it wasn't such a great idea to put hundreds of millions of dollars or at least tens of millions of dollars into a project with no source code, or a project with a little bit of source code and unproven developers. You know, this is kind of the I think people are finally starting to realize. And I know that there's got to be ICOs out there that are putting sell pressure on Ethereum. I mean, they got to be selling the crap out of that if they want, you know, their business to stay afloat. I believe Ragnar has a point, so let's go with you, Ragnar, real quick. Go ahead.
Yeah, talking about you know, adoption on a, you know, longer term level. I think as we go through these cycles of Bitcoin shooting up and then dropping off, and then once you live through 1 or 2 of those, you just have so much more confidence. And so I think as we see, whenever Bitcoin decides to go back up again, that's going to be, you know, what is this, the third, you know, second, third, fourth, however you define it, you know, bear market. And as more people get through it, survive it, and then are doing well based off of, you know, holding their coins, that's going to drive adoption. So it kind of takes these volatility cycles, and that brings in a whole new class of hardcore hodlers who said, yes, this works, you got to get through it. So that's just sort of another kind of weird way that good types of people coming to Bitcoin, you know, like Francis said, it's not like, I used to kind of think similar, you want mass adoption, but no, you don't need that. It's great, but you don't need it. What you need is kind of a small core group. And that goes to that kind of 10% rule. And Nassim Taleb, I think, talks about this. And it's actually is proven up in research where 10% of, you know, some population can actually change things by being the most vocal, by being the most intolerant. And so we don't need mass adoption. We need great people in the space and hodlers, et cetera. And that's going to drive more and more adoption.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of Trace Mayer's 7 network effects, I believe, right? Is the hodlers of last resort. That is what allows Bitcoin to continue to rise year after year, gaining more and more believers that will not sell. But Francis has one more final point. I want to go to him. But Francis, I want to double check. Did you say that, because I remember you tweeting about this, did you say that there was a study that said there was over 10% of Canadians are aware of Bitcoin or are holding Bitcoin?
No, so it's 5% of Canadians. 5% of Canadians own Bitcoin, and 10% of Canadian Bitcoiners own more than 10 Bitcoin. Right. So that's the number that I like, because these are the guys that have now like 60 grand worth of Bitcoin USD. Right.
That's amazing.
So you know, for these people, Bitcoin is the most important thing for their well-being and survival. And so. Really good point, Ragnar. I was, you know, I kind of wanted to say that. I kind of forgot. So, you know, I almost lost faith in Bitcoin at some point. I think like we all did. And, you know, thankfully, Bear Whale happened. And when Bear Whale happened, I went all in on Bitcoin. And I was like, oh, my God, this is the most awesome thing I've ever seen in my life. So
real quick, for people who don't know, the Bear Whale dumped like 30,000 coins onto the open market. And within a matter of hours, it was consumed. But sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Francis.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the only time I ever gave direct financial advice to my friends and to say you have to buy Bitcoin now. I never said that because I never wanted to ruin any friendship by people losing their money. But in that point, I had a private Facebook group with my high school friends. And I was like, guys, you need to buy Bitcoin right now. Those who did are pretty good friends now. So there's such a thing as the Lindy effect, which is the longer you hold Bitcoin, the more likely you are to hold Bitcoin over time and accumulate Bitcoin. So this is a compounding effect with time. So time is not linear. The adoption of Bitcoin is not linear. It's exponential. It's non-linear at all. There's this thing that the more time goes on, your holding doesn't go like that. It goes like this. You want more and more Bitcoin over time. And you know, I think beyond Bitcoin, two things. I think Bitcoin has taken Austrian economics mainstream. I think Austrian economics is definitely going mainstream. And I don't want to talk about Canada too much, but I do want to talk about something. I do want to talk about Maxime Bernier, which I've tweeted a lot about on Twitter, and it's kind of like out of character a little bit for me to tweet about Canadian politics. Well, not that much. I've been tweeting about Canadian politics a little bit more, but specifically because of this guy. And this guy was a Foreign Affairs Minister of Canada, and then he was a Minister of Trade, and then in another ministry. So a very important Canadian politician that was in government with the Conservative Party. And then because of this little cartels of dairy farmers that are blocking, that have completely corrupted Canadian politics entirely, he did the fucking UASF. He said, screw that, I'm starting my own party. Like, this is irredeemable, I'm forking off. And this guy enjoys about 17 to 18% voting intention. And this guy's policy, he wrote about the central bank. And he wrote that we need to have a serious discussion about going back to the gold standard. He's not a Bitcoiner yet, but I guarantee you that I'm going to make every effort on this guy. You know, I'm not going to make my effort on 100,000 people for adoption. I'm going to make all my effort on this guy. And he recently said, you know, maybe I'm a dreamer, but I think monetary economics should be a priority, should be the hot topic. And I reached out to him, and that was in 2010 when he wrote that. And I reached out to him recently, and I was like, is this still relevant? And he says, yeah, this is definitely still relevant. So, you know, some people that have really high convictions in politics can really affect change. And that, you know, that's it, you know. So I see a lot of really highly motivated people And regarding change, I mean, I read this number recently. I think it was like 3% of population was involved in the American Revolution or something like that. There was like 3% of the Americans were actively involved in it, whereas 97% of Americans during the Revolution against the English were kind of passive. And people should really definitely. I've been talking about it a lot. It is the most life-changing book for me. After Anti-Fragile, I mean, you can't, and Black Swan, you can't really read both. And the same reason why Bitcoin and Pierre Rochard is like one of my biggest influencers. And Pierre Rochard has a quote which is fantastic and which is true, which is that people do not objectively select currencies based on their properties. This is why nobody speaks Esperanto. Nobody's saying I'm going to objectively analyze all languages and I'm going to choose the most grammatically and vocabularily efficient one, which is Esperanto. People will adopt Bitcoin because they have no choice.
Yep, and I think that's what we're going to see. We're going to see. We've spoke about this all the time. In the first world countries, we've spoken about this all the time in podcasts about the first world countries being the last to actually adopt. Now, of course, because that's where most of the colleges and intelligences and stuff like that. Yeah, there's going to be bigger hodlers there. But at the end of the day, look, this is going to require global adoption, and the people are going to come to Bitcoin when they need to. And people are already talking. In the chat, there's having a great discussion in the chat. Highly recommend you guys join us live, and you can participate in the chat. But the people in the chat are having a great discussion, saying, about college debt. About how saying, college debt is another one of these centralized bubble, that we're living in the everything bubble at this point. And it's just getting crazy. And so, I love what Francis is saying about how, we don't necessarily need mass adoption tomorrow. I tweeted about this, that Bitcoin isn't a company, and there's posts about this as well, that Bitcoin isn't a company that needs startup, that needs startup money or needs adoption like right now, or else the investors are going to pull out. No. Bitcoin will take its time and continue taking its time, and it will take as long as it needs. And that will be perfect. And a lot of people are like, Bitcoin's like, is 21 million, the perfect number? Is 10 minutes blocks the perfect number? And it's like, no, any number, those numbers are all arbitrary. Any number is chosen would have essentially, the world would have adopted to, that we would have called Bitcoin. Now, of course, those numbers that we have are proven, but again, it doesn't matter, because like Francis is saying, you will need Bitcoin. So you might not, want to adopt it just because it's fun and it's new technology. No, you're going to at the end of the day, most people will adopt it because they need it. And nobody right now, all the children growing up and born right now, this is important to remember, that they will never know a world without Bitcoin. They will never know a world about going to 9-to-5 banks. They'll never understand about how when you put money into a bank, it never, ever appreciated. Like, they're going to understand crypto. They're going to have a crypto account at age 11 or 12. They're going to be starting businesses at 13, 14. And then they're going to come around at 18 to a bank, and they're going to say, we're going to charge you to hold your money. And, we were only open 9 to 5. Few days a week. They're going to look at it like a fax machine. It's going to be completely ridiculous. And so I'm glad that we're talking about this bullishness of all of these people adopting Bitcoin, because it's been a bit of a red week, right? It's been a bit of a downtrend. We're in a bear market. It's been we're 8 or 9 months into this bear market. But despite all of this red, we still have surveys going out like this. Surveys going out that's showing people are hopeful about Bitcoin. People are adopting Bitcoin. People understand the fundamentals of why they need to hold Bitcoin. Again. Let me just share out some of these stats that the article said. 59% of investors and 72% of consumers plan to increase their holdings over the next 12 months. And 50% of the investors and 66% of the consumers actually expect crypto growth in their crypto valuations over the next year. And both investors and consumers overwhelmingly picked Bitcoin as the top currency that they own. So, we're seeing people out there, we're seeing people be bullish. We understand that Bitcoin continues these cycles. We have these bear runs and these bull runs, the bull runs lasting typically about twice as long as the bear runs. So, we're about halfway through, and we're seeing that people now understand this. We're looking at the cycles, we're looking back, and we're seeing people the market start to slowly understand this. So that's really, really important. Let me ask if anybody has any other thing to say on this article. We're going. Okay. So so that was a great discussion, guys, so far. I mean, there was a lot of bullishness in this. Maybe just a couple more stats here from this article. It says that a new study among 1,200 adults revealed that around half want to use crypto over the dollar. So that's really great. 79% of Americans are familiar with at least one cryptocurrency. 71% said that they've heard of Bitcoin. So just lots of great stats coming out of these surveys these days, guys. People are bullish on crypto, as specifically Bitcoin, and of course we have every reason to. In my opinion, the fundamentals have never, ever been better for Bitcoin. This is the new asset class. This is the digital gold where people are going to store their wealth. So I think we've had a great show today, guys. I hope everybody has learned something. We went through those 3 topics. I hope everybody had a great time. We had over 100 live viewers, so we really appreciate everybody in there. But really appreciate everybody in the chat. Had a great time, guys. I think we can go ahead and have our outro. So let's go ask Francis Pouliot. Where can we find more about you, Francis?
Oh, you can definitely find me on Twitter. You can also find me at, I'm launching my new website for my business, probably Monday. So check it out when it comes out, satoshiportal.com. It's more of a corporate manifesto than a website. I think Bitcoiners will really like that. I'm about to make a really good announcement this week. So please be on the lookout for that one. I'm going after Coinbase, and then I'm going after blockchain.info, and then I'm going after BitPay. So I've been kind of keeping this stuff on the low key, not to raise expectations. But since I removed the blockchain consulting from my life, I've been incredibly productive. And also definitely check out the Riga Honey Badger conference. I'm also going to be releasing some software. And if you're a Bitcoin developer and you want to use Docker, I just created this morning bitcoindockers.com, which is the repo for Satoshi Portal's Docker. So we spent a lot of time making the most efficient and secure Docker containers for all sorts of Bitcoin projects. So check out bitcoindockers.com. The website's a bit rough now, but we're going to be adding some more Dockers. We have about 9 or 10 high-quality Docker containers for you to build your apps on.
Absolutely, man. Really great. Looking forward to that Honey Badger conference, guys. I think it's September 22nd, September 23rd, over there in Riga, Latvia. It's going to be a great time. It's almost a pilgrimage, again, kind of like scaling Bitcoin and building on Bitcoin, and some of these really Bitcoin focused conferences. It's a pilgrimage that all those Bitcoiners try to go to and make. So really awesome, Francis. Looking forward to that new software, and I will set high expectations because Francis is amazing. His software is amazing, and he's going to release some amazing shit. So definitely check that stuff out, guys. Francis is always working with the latest. He's got his developers always working with the latest and the greatest with Bitcoin, whether it's Lightning, whether it's C Lightning, whether it's the JavaScript libraries for C Lightning, whatever it is. Francis is working on it, and so we're really proud and glad to have you in the community, Francis. So thank you so much for that. Looking forward to that software. So Mr. Ragnar, the king of blockchain and real estate, let me ask you, man, where can we find more about you?
So the International Blockchain Real Estate Association is just ibrea.network. So if you like the intersection of that, some great companies coming out, a couple I'm advising. And then my personal website, if you want to contact me or just kind of see what I do, is just my last name.is, so leaftracer.is. Twitter, I'm on @Ragnarly. I'm also on Gab now, @Ragnarly there as well. And then I'm also going to the Honey Badger conference, going to speak there. So I'll see, I think, a couple of you guys there speaking on my favorite topic, Bitcoin and real estate. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, man, looking forward to it. It's going to be great, dude. I forgot Ragnar's going too. Francis is going. Man, there's so many people that are going to be there. I am really excited. Going to be starstruck. Going to be taking a lot of photos, doing a lot of interviews for the CryptoCast. Hopefully, we'll be able to get a bunch of interviews from people on the ground, maybe even some demos from some amazing stuff that Francis might release. So should be a good time. I'm really looking forward to that. Stefan, first, just want to thank you again for having me on your podcast just recently, man. That was a great time. I highly encourage everybody to check out Stefan's podcast. He's got a lot of them out there already. Puts one out every few days at something at this point. He's making us all look bad. Stefan, where can we find out more about you, sir?
Excellent. Thanks very much for having me on. Guys, you can find my podcast by searching Stefan Livera Podcast on the iTunes Store or pretty much any of the podcast apps. And yeah, as Vortex mentioned, I try to really I take a really Bitcoin-centric view, and I really bring a very Austrian economics view as well to my podcasting. And so I've interviewed many of the big names in Bitcoin, Safedine, Pierre Rochard, Michael Goldstein, just recently released the Samson Mo interview, Vijay Boyapati, many others. So if you're interested, go and check that out. And also my website, stefanlivera.com. And also my Twitter account is @StefanLivera. My DMs are open, so if you've got any questions or any feedback for me, you're welcome to come and discuss with me there. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man, it was an awesome time. And, you have been putting out some great content, even on the WCN with Matt over there. The WCN is putting out a lot of, thanks to Matt, has been putting out a lot of Austrian economic type of podcasts. So I encourage everybody to check that out too. A lot of good stuff. I'm learning a lot, Stefan, from you guys. I'm not a traditional economist or anything like that, just a web developer, but man, learning a lot from people like you, Pierre Rochard and Michael Goldstein. Of course, they have their noted podcast, and I'll actually be guest starring on that pretty soon as well. So definitely take a look out for that. And again, guys, just want to remind you that we did launch 2 new shows this week. Beauty On is in the chat right now, giving his amazing advice as he always does. We launched a podcast called Bitcoin Matters, hosted by Beauty On, and that's a great audio podcast diving into the important facts about what Bitcoin can do for people globally. And then of course we have our crypto Q&A show that's hosted by the one and only Heidi at Blockchain Chick on Twitter. We have a great Q&A format there where people can join the chat and ask questions, and it's more targeted for new people, novices into the space, to try to get their questions answered. So again, guys, thanks so much for joining. We really appreciate it. We're going to be putting out more and more content as much as we can right here on the CryptoCast Network. But until next time, guys, keep talking Bitcoin. We'll see you later.